Well, hi, my name is Dan Walsh. I've been at Red Hat for 24 and a half years. I've been to every DevConf ever. Not really, but a lot of them. So I've given a lot of talks at DevConfs, and I am retiring at the end of October, October 31st. So this is my Red Hat Obituary. And when I was in Czech Republic, they didn't understand the word obituary. So they know English, but they don't know what obituary was. And so that's the word for obituary in Czech. So I'm not really dead yet, and I'm not retired yet either. So, but there's a guy named Mike Rowe who had a podcast called The Way I Remembered Things, or The Way I Heard It. And so the basic idea here is everything I'm going to tell is the way I remember it, but if you know anything about memory, it can be faulty. So some of these stories might be made up, or they might be real. So this basically, in some ways, I feel like I'm the Forrest Gump of computing, or at least open source computing. So we'll talk a lot about that in my career. So let's start out. So this is, I think, my freshman year in college. Can anybody pick out who I am in that picture? I am the handsome one. That's a good answer. That's me. So that's me as an 18-year-old. Check out those socks. That was 1978. That was happening. So and I got a BA in mathematics because they hadn't invented computing yet. Turing was still working on it. But anyways, my college had no computer science major at the time, so I got a BA in mathematics. My first programming language was done on these things. Punch cards. I wrote Fortran, so it was Fortran, and an interesting thing about Fortran is that the first 7 characters of these cards, you always had a tab over, and that's why tabs are 8 characters long, believe it or not. So when you hit tab, the standard was 8 characters. So on one of these cards, you would type the number in the first 7 characters would say, you type number 1, then you type your line of code, then you type number 2, and the reason you would do that is you would walk around with, say 100 cards. If you drop them on the ground, how could you reassemble your code? Well, you did it by using the first 7 characters. So that was Fortran. So my freshman year, we were doing cards. And the interesting thing, everything was batch processing, so the compiler was batch processing. So you would stay up all night because during the day, the computer would run the college's software. And if you went on at 2 or 3 in the morning, you get your compile back very quickly, like 15 or 20 minutes. So you would hand in all your cards, they compile it, they come back and say, oh, you got a bug on line 7, you missed a semicolon or whatever, and now you go into there and type that card up again, put it in, and wait another 15 minutes and during the day, it would take 2 hours to get back to compile. Anyways, the following year, we got these. These are called Deckwriter 100s. And if you see, there's a huge box of paper, and for some reason, they always had green striped paper, green line paper. Some of the older people in the room probably remember these things. So they had a whole bunch of them, but it was great, right? You could actually type your program in and had some memory of it. And you weren't on punch cards or anything. But the interesting thing, the first computer game I ever played with was called Adventure. And it was a command line tool where you would basically sit there and say, okay, turn left. And it would come out and type your line. And turn right. Okay, go forward. And all these type of things. And they were going through reams and reams of paper as everybody in college got into playing computer games. So the following year, they came out with one of these. This is a VT100, and basically it was the first display. So this is my junior year of college. Junior and senior year, they had VT100s, and it was a huge leap forward in that. So that's my college career. In 1982, I graduated from college. And I had a job interview with the National Security Agency, the NSA. They told me, I'd never flown on an airplane before. They paid for a flight down to Washington, D.C. For me to fly down, and they told me to take a limo to Fort Meade. Fort Meade's where the NSA works out. I, being a stupid college kid, never been on a plane before. I got to Washington, D.C., or actually it was BWI, Baltimore, and told me to take a limo. There was a black town car sitting out there, so I took a limo to the, so I think that might have been a black mark. But anyways, in April I interviewed for the National Security Agency. In May I graduated from college. June I worked at McDonald's on the Cape, on the beach with 3 other girls. And we had a grand old time. In July, the NSA refused to hire me, and I was without a job. So later in that year, there was at the time, there was this thing called the family dentistry. So these were dental, all the malls, for those young ones, there used to be these big buildings where they'd have stores inside of them. They were called malls. And they had basically dental places were starting to open up in there. And so this was a chain of dentistries that hired me to work on programming. So people remember the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick? They used televideo screens. So that's a televideo monitor. So we were working on televideo. They actually, the computers with televideo in that. And I met my wife. So my wife was a dental hygienist. She worked at the dentistry. It was a great place to go as a young guy to meet women. Other than the old dentist, I was like the only young guy in the place. So Westwood Dental, I wrote COBOL. So in year 2000, I felt like I was very important. I worked in an operating system called CPM. And this existed before MS-DOS. So Bill Gates was still inventing MS-DOS, and CPM was the big language at that time. And I worked on basically all the software that you would do for billing and people check-ins, things like that at there. So the biggest company, one of the biggest companies in the world, especially in New England at the time, was called Digital Equipment Corporation. Again, the old people know who that is. But this company was second only to IBM in the world. They had 135,000 employees at the time. So think about this, it was 7 times the size of Red Hat. So it was a huge corporation, and you've never heard of it now. So it sort of disappeared. You might have heard of some of the stuff that they did, VAX, things like that. So I got a job at Digital Equipment Corporation. At Digital, that year was 1985, and I got married. And I met this guy. He said, hi, I'm Paul Cormier. For those youngins who don't know any history of Red Hat, this is the guy that for basically was, I think 2 years ago, stopped being the top guy at Red Hat. So he was the CEO of Red Hat for many, many years. He was the CTO. And I worked for him starting then. Offered me a job. And he told me he was quite a bit younger. So that's the only, I couldn't find a young picture of him. So we worked on a thing called Decathena. Okay, anybody here ever hear of the Athena project? Again, this is my Forrest Gump thing. Okay, I'm going to name some projects, and you're going to say, oh, I've heard of that. So Decathena was a model of distributed computing that was basically sponsored by IBM and Digital Equipment Corporation. We funded a lot of research at MIT to develop a distributed operating system, and this is way back. We invented the product protocol for security called Kerberos. We invented a little thing called X Windows, and it was all based on top of Unix. So it was very, for that time frame, 1986, 1987, it was very early in the world. So I went from Digital Equipment, working on a Decathena project, and they developed this thing called Alta Vista. And so for the youngins in the world, Alta Vista was Google before Google existed. Alta Vista was the first major search engine on the internet. Interesting story about Alta Vista, they didn't own altavista.com. So you used to have to go to digitally.com/altavista to get it. The guy who owned altavista.com wouldn't sell it. So, but Alta Vista was hugely important early in the course of the internet. We also worked on, I personally worked on Alta Vista Firewall. It was the first firewall of the White House to protect whitehouse.com. Personally, I worked on Alta Vista Tunnel. Alta Vista Tunnel was the first VPN in And these were all using BMS backends. We could get up to 60 people simultaneously connected over a VPN with encryption. It was incredible. Then the machine would crash, but once you got to 61. So I was still working for Paul Cormier at the time. In 1986, 96, 97, basically as we were ramping up to the height of the .com explosion, Digital Equipment Corporation was going to spin off Alta Vista into its own company. I was going to be so friggin' rich. And suddenly, Digital Equipment Corporation got bought out by a company called Compaq. Compaq was a huge maker of PCs, who also doesn't exist. We used to have a picture on the wall that showed Alta Vista being eaten by Digital, and then Compaq Digital. There was all these fish were eating the next one. So Compaq Corporation, which was about the size, this time was just like Dell. It was a huge PC manufacturer, bought Digital. Compaq ended up getting bought out by HP, so there was a whole chain of companies. So after Alta Vista didn't spin out and we didn't get unbelievably rich, and Paul said bye-bye. So Paul went to a startup in 1999, joined a startup called HackerShield. What HackerShield was is an effort to use hacker tools to scan your network and see if you have vulnerabilities. Basically, would go out to all the open IP addresses on your network, would go in and try to use hacks to see if your machines were vulnerable, and that would give you a report and say, hey, you better upgrade this machine, stuff like that. And we hired a whole bunch of hackers at the time, and I was working, so Paul calls me up and said, Dan, you want to join HackerShield? I said, what the hell? So I went to HackerShield. And a month later, HackerShield got bought out by a company called BindView. And I can remember that everybody celebrating as they got super rich, and I got like a free beer. So now I work for a company called BindView, and this is the only time in my career where I had a floor-to-ceiling office overlooking a lovely, I was so valuable. So BindView happened in 1999. I was going to have untold riches from BindView. .com was just happening, and then all of a sudden, .com goes bust. And BindView ended up basically closing down their Boston office. It was based out of Houston, Texas. I think BindView eventually got bought by the security scanning company. But Paul said, I'm going to leave, and I'm joining this company called Red Hat, and said, BindView lays me off in the middle of that summer on a Friday. Paul calls up and says, Dan, you want to work on Red Hat on Monday? So I said, sure. So I went to work for Red Hat on Monday. That was in 2001, in basically August. I believe it was August 3rd. Red Hat believes it was August 6th. They're probably right. So yeah, I asked Paul, what do you want me to work on? And he said, work on some security stuff. So up to this point, my entire career has been around security, right? Securing, first doing VPNs and Kerberos, and then eventually into HackerShield type stuff, scanning, things like that. So I go to Red Hat. By the way, I'm working remotely, probably on a 9600 baud modem from my house at the time. And I don't know anything about anybody in open source, and I'm out there basically saying, what's a free VPN, or what's a free, and my guidance from him was just work on security stuff. At that point, Red Hat had about 400 employees. I was working from home, and there was basically no employees near Boston at that point other than Paul. And we were investigating open source firewalls and VPNs, and I was writing GUIs in Python. September 11th happens, 9/11. And on September 20th, I had my new hire in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I had to get on an airplane to fly to North Carolina, or about 10 or so days. I don't know if September 20th was the correct date, but somewhere around that time. So I was one of the first planes to go back up in a plane once they allowed you to go back up. So it was quite an adventure at that point. Interesting thing there is I had a laptop, and when I went through security, they said boot it up to a Windows screen. And I'm like, I use this thing called Linux. It says login at the bottom of the screen. Looks like a hack. Yeah. So, but anyways, because I look like this, they allowed me to go through because I don't look like a terrorist, or at least an Irish terrorist. So, NSA, back to the NSA. NSA wants to basically open source SELinux and get it into the upstream Linux kernel. They come to Red Hat and they say, we want Red Hat to upstream it, and we're going to give you $5 million. And $5 million now is nothing, but at that point, it was huge for Red Hat. And so Red Hat went around looking for a security engineer to work on it. My name pops up. Payback at last. Mr. SELinux, and the NSA's had a deal with me since. So this guy comes along, this guy's name, he was my first youngin at Red Hat. His name is Eric Paris, and he said, hi, I'm Eric Paris. He was a new hire, and I do SELinux kernel work, and I'm Dan's first youngin. So I've been dealing with youngins for many years, and then we're going to cover a lot of youngins in this talk, except he's not so young anymore. Matter of fact, I'm no longer a youngin, but I am a distinguished engineer at Red Hat, and I'm a bigwig in the OpenShift department. He manages about, I don't know, he told me over 200 people or something now. So I just saw he's actually came up for my retirement. But Eric, anyways, was a great guy. So I started doing it at SELinux. And Major, you want to stand up in the back of the room somewhere? There's Major Hayden. So for those real youngins in the room, I worked on this thing called SELinux, Security Enhanced Linux. It's very difficult for a lot of people to use, very difficult to understand, and a lot of people were disabling it. So the major thing was always disabling it. So Major put up this website. You can still go there. It's called Stop Disabling SELinux. And he said that every time someone disabled it, I cried. So that became a thing, and Major even sold T-shirts that had, the way to disable SELinux was set and force 0. He had a T-shirt made that says set and force 1, which meant turn it on. So in 2005, there's a thing called MLS. So one of the reasons the National Security Agency, Department of Defense wanted to have something like SELinux, which basically controls the way processes work on a Linux system, is for this concept of MLS, multi-level security. And that would be top secret and secret. You'd go into a box and you could be logged in as top secret, and another box you'd log in as secret, and you could look at top secret documents or secret type documents. So same user logging into different systems depending on which network you came in. If you logged in on the secret network, when you logged onto the box, you would see top secret, secret files. If you logged in on the top secret network into the same box, you would see top secret files. So we had to have a way to mount over file systems on the disk so that we would mount the top secret files when you came in via this network. If you came in via a different network, you come in as secret. There was a thing called the mount namespace that was developed at that point. And for those that know containers, the mount namespace is pretty much the basis of all container technologies. So back in 2005, I started working with the mount namespace, which was basically the first container, and it went out in RHEL 5. So I had this great idea. I got SELinux that controls the way processes work. I have the mount namespace. Perhaps I could run a version of Firefox that went out to the internet, and I could run a different version of Firefox that only saw the intranet. And I could isolate them, and I called that the SELinux sandbox. What the SELinux sandbox allowed you to do is divide up your home directory based on what you were doing on the system. So we could run Firefox with different SELinux confinements. You could use C groups to control what was going on the systems, so you can control how much resources they were using. Sadly, I didn't call it a container. Okay, so that's the SELinux sandbox. It became pretty popular. I also created this concept of XGuest, which was a person that would log on. How many people have ever gone to the library to print something out and you log into a system? And you just start web browsing on it, and everything you do is kept on that system. So I thought it'd be really great if when you logged out, everything you ever did was wiped from the planet. So you could have tempfs's on your home directory or temp directory. So I invented this concept called the XGuest for kiosk users. So in 2008, we needed a way to isolate multiple VMs on a system. So if I ran multiple VMs on a system and this VM escaped, to be able to attack the rest of the system. But I wanted to use SELinux security to do it. But the problem with VMs is SELinux was a type enforcement. There's a coloring book I'm going to mention that later in the talk. There's a coloring book that used to talk about cats and dogs. So you can basically define a cat and define a dog, and a cat can eat cat food and a dog can eat dog food, but a dog can't eat the cat food. And so that's what SELinux is called, type enforcement. But we also wanted to isolate each cat from each other. So we wanted to isolate the cat from his cat food from another cat. So we had no way to do that. So imagine a VM would run, we'd allow certain access to a VM, and another VM we would only allow access to its image. But we wanted to isolate if they broke out so they couldn't attack each other. And we have this concept of MCS. And MCS was our ability to use another part of SELinux to control the way the virtual machines were labeled on the systems in a way that they were isolated. That was called SVIRT, and that was my first patent. So back in 2008, I started into the patenting game of a lot of SELinux concepts, and we developed this way of isolating individual processes that did the same thing on a system using MCS. And after describing SELinux, a very tough concept to describe for many, many years, I figured out a better way to do it. I worked with this lady called Maureen Duffy, and she said, you want to describe SELinux as a coloring book? Let's do it. So we created a thing called the SELinux coloring book. And that was my first published document. Mo and I used to go around Red Hat headquarters in Westford, Mass, and go to every single printer and print out 50 or 100 copies. And then we'd run to the next one, and we'd have hundreds of these copies. Of course, we never told anybody to doing it. The maintenance man or whoever was in charge of the printers must have been like going out of his mind because everything was wiped out of. But customers loved them, understood. She became a DE as well, distinguished engineer, and now working in Lightspeed at Red Hat. So we created the SELinux coloring book. Later, I created the containers coloring book, and then finally the container commandos coloring book. There was going to be a Goldilocks coloring book that talked about why security isn't as tight as it should be, but then COVID happened, so it never got published. 2008 timeframe. This is Mike McGrath. For those who don't work for Red Hat, he is basically the guy who, well, at that time, he was the head of Fedora infrastructure, and at a FudCon, which is like a conference like DEF CONF, but for Fedora users, Mike and I had a heated discussion on SELinux. He was not sure it was worth the trouble, is what I think he told me, but he did like Elvis sideburns. And he said, I am not a big fan of SELinux. So he took off that project and started working on a thing called OpenShift. And OpenShift was basically going to be, at that time, with a terminal server where people would SSH into a box. All you had to give Red Hat to get access to these boxes in the cloud was basically an email address, and then we'd allow you SSH in, and the goal was to build software on those systems. Basically a web service, and help developers create applications for RHEL. Users only need to provide email address, and it's developed and managed by this guy, Mike McGrath. So he had thousands of unused users coming on to shared systems, and he wanted to make sure that they didn't interfere with each other. Dan, could you help me with SELinux to keep the users isolated? Mike is now Vice President, Core of Platforms at Red Hat. He's in charge of all RHEL and has a huge organization underneath it. He doesn't have sideburns anymore. And so that's me with a Mike McGrath mouse pad. So, many years ago, I needed a shave. So, eventually it became time to move on from SELinux. I've been working on SELinux for about 10 years at that time, so 2012. I decided to move on from that and concentrate more on container technologies. We were building a thing now focusing on container with SELinux support and policy. Meet up with new youngins. This guy came in to take over SELinux for me. At that time, he was, I think, 12 years old. And his name is Lucas Vrayback, and I'm now in charge of all SELinux and other RHEL security tools. So he's grown up quite a bit, but he's out in Czech Republic. So I moved on to work on OpenShift, but OpenShift has evolved at that point into using C groups and namespaces. I was creating a project called Vert Sandbox. So this was the next version of the SELinux sandbox, except it was looking at system workloads. So what we wanted to do at this point, we were thinking you'd take /user, share it among a bunch of containers or a bunch of sandboxes, and have different etcs and /vars for each one of those. And we were building a tool into it to basically take advantage of containers and SELinux to do that. Vert Sandbox is, Newberg had said that. And we're preparing, this is about 9 months before RHEL 7 was going to be released to the world. And this guy named Matt Hicks comes along. He was in charge of OpenShift. By the way, Matt Hicks is now the CEO of Red Hat. So he's the biggest cheese at Red Hat right now. So he comes along and says to me, what do you want to do about Docker? And I said, what's Docker? And so Docker F was kicked off in September of 2012. The container Docker team was formed with me in charge of it. Solve issues like layered file systems for RHEL, SELinux isolation for containers. We have this great engineer who's now in the Rivals project named Alex Larson. He worked on implementing a couple of huge file system changes to get on it. Another guy named Vivek Goyal was a storage expert who also came and worked on the team. Basically, I was just grabbing anybody I could from around Red Hat to help us get this thing off the ground. He leads the Rivals engineering team, and this guy now, he moved to the dark side. So he's now a manager in AI working on PyTorch. They're still good friends of mine. So at Red Hat Summit, basically 9 months later, we had full support for Docker built in, so we're working on top of RHEL. This is Solomon Hykes, basically the creator of Docker. And he was the first keynote of Red Hat Summit in 2013. And RHEL 7 announcement was talking about Docker. Everything in the world was about Docker at that point. Docker was on the main stage. People like to make fun of the way I say the word Docker, because they don't understand proper English. So this GIF was made and was widely circulated every time I would talk about Docker. So one of the talks I gave at one of the dev comps was basically Docker and systemd did not get along. So if you ever met Solomon Hykes, or the other guy here is Leonard Pottering. He was an engineer at that time for Red Hat. He now works for Microsoft. They hated each other. He hated Docker containers. He hated systemd. So there was always a battle on who we control what the containers running on top of the system. And I tried to basically open up lots of systemd requests into Docker to fix things. And a Docker employee who I blocked out from this wore at the first DockerCon a badge which said, I say no to all systemd specific requests. So Docker was not going to take anything in from systemd, anything that would make Docker and systemd work together. So OpenShift and Kubernetes and Docker had conflicts. So at that time, OpenShift was based on top of Kubernetes. Kubernetes was based on top of Docker. But every time Docker would release, they would break Kubernetes. And so there was always this constant turn of what was going on with Docker. So Kubernetes decided they needed an alternative runtime that was dedicated more to Kubernetes workloads, and we started the CRI-O effort. Kubernetes defined a thing called the Container Runtime Interface, CRI, and also at that point, Docker and a bunch of the community members created a thing called OCI, Open Container Initiative. So CRI-O stands for Container Runtime Interface for OCI containers. So this was a tool, a daemon for creating basically containers that would run underneath Kubernetes, but totally deprecate and remove Docker from the equation. The guy in the middle is Google's Kelsey Hightower. He's very internet famous. But the two guys in here are youngins, Ronald Patel, who went on to lead the CRI-O effort underneath me originally and went on for many years in it, and now he's a big week inside of OpenShift. And the other guy is Antonio Murdarka. He was a youngin, also worked for me with Docker, and he now works on edge computing for Micah somewhere in the room. They're both great engineers. So Cryo needs additional functionality, ability to pull image and container images. This guy is Miloslav Termak. He is one of the smartest guys. If he ever questions your pull request, realize you're wrong, because he's right. So he's Miloslav Termak. He's also in Czech Republic. He's an absolutely brilliant engineer. He invented a thing called Scopio, or he wrapped Scopio in around his container image. So this is all about pulling and pushing images off of container registries. And he created Scopio. And then we needed the ability to store and build images from containers image. And this guy, Nalan Daibai, who can raise his hand, he's very shy in the background back there. So Nalan and I have been, we were cube mates for many, many years. And the story on, he created a thing called Builder. So the story behind Builder was Nalan and I were sitting at a DevConf in Czech Republic. And I told Nalan, I think what we really need is a way for containers to be, for us to build container images from command line. At the time I was saying, you know, we need just a way to use bash, instead of using Docker files, to use bash to be able to create containers. And we had a long conversation on Friday, and by Sunday, he invented it. And he basically had a proof of concept going. I think we showed it at like a 5-minute thing during the summit. And he asked me what to call it, and I said, I don't care what we call it, just call it Builder. And of course, he misspelled it, but. So Cryo needs it. Both of them still work in the containers team, and Nalan's still working on Builder and on Scopio, Miloslav. So Cryo needed additional tools and needed ability to test containers and pods. Fellow engineer came onto the effort, Brent Bowdy, and him and I worked together on the containers team, and a project called KPod was born. So KPod was basically a tool, if you actually, Matt here, well, I'm about to introduce Matt here, I probably should hold up. But KPod stood for Kubernetes Pods. So that's just what we had named. And really, it was a test tool for us testing containers locally. Valentin Rothberg contributed partly on the project. Valentin, the famous thing about him, he worked for Suzy at the time, and I told him that he wanted to join Red Hat, and I said, no, you can't join Red Hat because I'd like to have external contributors to the project. And he said, I won't work on the project anymore unless you hire me. So he blackmailed me. And now Valentin still works for Red Hat. And so I got a whole bunch of youngins at the time. So these were interns. I used to specialize in interns. So one year I had 8 interns for the summer. And these are some of those interns who you might Matt Heon is one of the bigwigs of here in the corner. He's continued to work on Podman and one of the top engineers of Podman. You might recognize this little lady here. So she's the one running this organization this weekend. This is Urvashi. She came to work for me, and I intimidated her so bad I mispronounced her name for 2 years, and she wouldn't tell me about it. And someone finally told me it's not Urvashi, it's Urvashi. And so she's great, and she runs this whole thing. And then this youngin came in at the time who also runs this organization, the DevConf. And so Sally joined as a youngin at that time, semi-youngin. And yeah, so she came in intern for me. And then Peter Hunt also joined us at that point. Peter is now basically the guy that runs Cryo on the organization. Urvashi now works on OpenShift on the MCO, and Sally works in Octo, right? Yeah, emerging technologies. So these other youngins came. Ashley, where are you? So Ashley was like the following year as an intern and still works on the Podman effort, a great engineer. This guy is Paul Holzinger. He's a German, fabulous engineer. He's pretty young. I think he still is around 15 or something. But Charlie Dern, who works on the AI effort, he came in and interned. He's another one that looks like he's about 12. And Aditya, who is our Indian intern, he basically came and worked for us on the project. He helped work on Podman to Builder, and he's from India, but used to work U.S. hours. So I think he stayed up every night for years. And now he finished college in the U.S. and now is working in the U.S. for Red Hat. Okay, so Docker introduced a concept of what's called Moby. And Moby project was basically an effort to, they weren't happy because we were shipping patched versions of Docker for things that they wouldn't accept, like the systemd patches and ability to use registries. So we wanted to support alternative container registry, better support systemd. Docker changed the license to try to prevent us from using Docker. So they basically allowed us to use the word Docker for many, many years, and then they said, no, you can't use the word Docker anymore unless you get rid of all your patches and only ship from the upstream. So changes upstream, so the upstream project from the name Docker to the name Moby tells Red Hat we must use Moby, and I said game on. So I threw out Docker and I created Podman. So Kpod got renamed to Podman. And that is basically when, in RHEL 8, we decided to dump Docker totally from the system. And our big thing at that point was aliasing Docker equals Podman. So we wanted to copy the entire CLI and do a better job on Podman. Kpod renamed to Podman. RHEL 8, we dropped it. This guy, Scott McCarty, was basically the containers tool, basically product manager. He now is in charge of RHEL. He's the product manager for all of RHEL. And I did a famous talk at DevConf Czech where I had a swear jar, and every time I said the word Docker, I'd have to throw money into the swear jar because Docker had basically got the adjective everywhere. So you always had to say Docker, Docker images, Docker containers, Docker this, Docker that, Docker files. And so I became at war with the word Docker. So anybody in Red Hat knows they don't say the word Docker in front of me. I also wrote a book. The history of this book is that my mother passed away, and I always promised I'd write a book, so I wrote a book. I wouldn't advise anybody to ever write a book. It's a lot of work, but anyways, I wrote a real book. And then I moved on from the Podman team. So one of my histories at Red Hat is I am a credit sucker. All good things that happen at Red Hat is because of me. So I felt that I was blocking other engineers from getting the credit that they deserve, so I decided to move on from Podman and get out of the way so these other engineers like Matt and Alan and other people could get recognition, and I'd stop getting all the recognition. There was an effort to do containers on the edge or containers on wheels, and so we used to call it the cow team. But basically this was Rivos, Red Hat in-vehicle operating system. So I went to a new manager, Jeff Ligon. Where are you, Jeff? Yeah, I got your picture in there. So I worked for this guy, and I just added Dan to my Rivos team. And so one of the major efforts of Rivos was functional safety, which is different from security in that functional safety means if something goes wrong in the system, you've got to shut the car down. So if you're driving in your self-driving mode and something blows up, you want to pull the car over to the side or tell a human being to take over the steering wheel. So in order to do that, there's tons and tons of rules to prove that you have a functionally safe operating system. And Red Hat has been investing lots and lots of money to prove that Linux is functionally safe. So over the last several years, we've been working on that. And again, Alex Larson comes back in, and he becomes the lead engineer of all of Rivos. He's a fabulous engineer, and So anyways, so in this past year, we got functionally safe requirements. So we have an outside organization that has claimed that Red Hat RHEL is functionally safe. So Jeff Ligon comes along and has this functionally safe jacket made up. And see, Jeff, I got your picture in twice. And just to show, so I have one of those too. I wear that to the beach. The good thing is, if you're in a traffic jam, you get out of your car, you start telling people to move over the side. So it's pretty good. So back in 2023, I said I'm retiring. I always planned on retiring early. Then I bought sand at the beach and put a house up on it and decided I might work for a little while longer. But anyways, I went to Matt Hicks, who's the current CEO for the youngins in the room. He's the current CEO of Red Hat. And I said, Matt, I'm planning on retiring. So Matt said to me, well, this is, again, the tail end of COVID. It'd be great if you came to the Boston office to spend some time with some engineers, because we have a lot of youngins coming to the office. And I said, sure, this is just what engineers want, an ancient dinosaur to sit down and eat lunch with them. So I live in Maine. It's about a 2-hour train ride into Boston. So for the last 2 years, I've been coming in 1 day a week on the train. Takes me about 5 hours round trip, but I come in for the youngins, and they just love that I'm here. So some of the youngins are in the back of the room, probably somewhere around here. And so after that, he said, what do you want to do until you retire? And I said, other than drink beer, this guy named Colin Walters has some good ideas. And I explained to him what Colin was inventing, a thing called Bootc, so bootable containers. And he said, great. I wanted by Summit in 9 months, and he wanted to call it a moonshot. So basically, I came to him and said, I have an idea. This is in November. 9 months later, in May, he wanted to have Bootc part of RHEL. And I said, yikes. So Bootc Collins is a famous 1970s guitarist, funkadelic, and so we had a guy named Colin Bootc Walters, and so it was Colin's idea was to design an operating system based on a container file, build with standard tools, Podman and Builder, add a Bootc command that allows you to pull down container images that included the kernel, replace the operating system right lively, allow you to build operating system artifacts, and add Anaconda support, and jumping ahead. So that's what Bootc was. And Bootc, so we had a big kickoff meeting basically about a month later, that meeting. A bunch of us in a room, and Matt Hicks comes in the last day and says, it would be cool if you could demo Bootc as an AO demo. And I said, what the? So 2024, 6 months later, we announced RHEL image mode, which is based on Bootc, and we tied it all into AI. So, and this is a lot of the people that worked on it. And so there I am. There's Sally is. This is Mo Duffy, Colin Walters, and a few other people that are around here. So this is basically the core Bootc team. And as you can see, we all have Bootc glasses on. So we wanted, after that happened, basically Matt told me to concentrate on AI. So I worked on a project called AI Lab Recipes, which was kicked off by Sally O'Malley and Michael Clifford here. He left, okay. So basically goal was to teach people how to use AI, at the time, and make it easy for developers to develop tools that would use AI. It was a Podman desktop plugin. I helped developers write AI applications based on Sally's and Michael's work, and I worked on that. I also met this other youngin called Sergio Lopez, one of the smartest guys at Red Hat now. He works in the Rivos team. But we needed to have, I'm a big supporter of Macs, even though I would never run one on my laptop, because I don't like dead fruit on the back of the laptops. But they have really good GPUs in them. And so one of the problems is if we want to run AI in containers, we have to have a way of getting the GPU into the VM. So into the VM, Sergio developed this tool. We needed Mac GPUs to work in Podman machines. Sergio was working on the Rivos, one of my mentees. He developed a thing called Live Krun, and then eventually a thing called Krun Kit. And Podman and Docker both use it now, but basically the fundamental thing is this launches the Podman machines, the VMs, with access to GPUs inside of this. This is something Apple can't do. So this is only something we use. So using Apple native hypervisor, you can't do this, but this guy invented a way to do it. So I moved on from the Bootc stuff to do AI stuff full time. Met this guy named Eric Curtin, another one of my youngins. He worked on Rivos. And he came to me, and he basically came to me, and he was trying to contribute to OLAMA at the time. Llama is an open source project for running AI local, but he found them very hostile to open source. So basically, they wouldn't accept any of his patches. He found that they used a tool underneath it called Llama CPP, and he built his own version using bash scripts. So when I saw this effort, I said, you know, that's really cool, but we got to dump the bash scripts and rewrite it in Python so it's easily for users to contribute. So that's when RamaLama was born. So RamaLama is a tool for running AI models inside of containers on a system. We did a talk earlier today on RamaLama. So here's the course of my career. So containers, AI, security, and SELinux. That's it. So, and when people ask me, what is Red Hat going to do without me, I like to point out this graveyard. And we use this graveyard today, so the graveyards are full of indispensable people. So I will move on, but I probably will still have a relation. I still will be a contractor from Red Hat going forward. So. And if you want to know what I'm going to do after this, then I'm going to do this. Notice any relationship between the two of us? So I have 5 grandkids. So as my only granddaughter, I have 3 sons, 4 grandsons, and finally had a granddaughter. She didn't like me for a while. That's all, everybody together. And that's the only picture I got her where she'll actually sit with me without screaming in horror. So anyways, that's it. Hope you enjoy it.